Welcome back here to the show. We talked yesterday about the late George Foreman, who passed away Friday in Houston at the age of 73. And I share with you a couple of my stories. We're thrilled right now with more on George Foreman to be joined by the great Hall of Fame announcer, Al Bernstein. Al, welcome to the show. What a real treat to have you here.
Very nice to be with you. Unfortunately, we have to talk about a sad passing, but nice to visit with you.
Thank you. Absolutely. I wish it was in better times, although we have communicated over social media over time. Just let's start. Give all of us, our listeners, your memories of the great George Foreman.
George and I were good friends. He wrote the foreword for my book, and especially once I wasn't covering boxing even when he had his first incarnation in the 70s 60s and 70s as a fighter. But I did announce a number of his fights when he made his comeback in the late 30s and early 40s. And so I did cover that portion of his career. And then since then, we got to be really good friends. And as I said, he wrote the foreword for my book. We shared many things in common. We're both avid horse riders. We would often call each other and talk about that and what our latest exploits in team penning or one of those things. So he was just a guy that I was happy to know, happy to spend time with. And, I'm feeling the loss on a personal level, just as so many people are feeling the loss that didn't know him because of their contact with him from not only his boxing, but also his other endeavors.
What I found in my brief encounter, nothing at all on a personal level, as you enjoyed over the many years, was he was somebody with a quick wit.
Very much so.
Yeah, that was one of my first takeaway is this guy has a good sense of humor.
You hit it right on the head. That is exactly true. People sometimes they think, well, maybe this big laughable guy that does this thing, it's all scripted and it's all just a one-trick pony character. No, he's a very funny guy. And Larry, he was a funny guy even in his first incarnation. I didn't know him back then, but from people I talked to, even when he was the big, fierce George Foreman, he was the same guy. It's just that he didn't show it to the public. And that, I think, is one of the factors of George Foreman that maybe not everybody gets. He's quick-witted and a joy to be around. He's just a fun guy to spend time with.
Yeah. Obviously, he was one of the fiercest boxers of the 70s back in his heyday and comes back around later for that second tour. I'm assuming that's kind of when you got to know him. What do you think made him so special for a guy who was winning fights at an age long past when you usually see guys retire? How is he able to do that when maybe others have not been able to?
Yeah, that's a good question. He had that long layoff where he went back to Houston as a pastor, then decided he's going to give it a go again. And the interesting thing is he did it in a very intriguing way with him. At the time, the USA fights were on USA Network had fights every Tuesday night. ESPN, I was a series I was on. We had weekly fights where the fights were good fights, but they weren't all championship level fights. And it was the perfect platform for him to come back, fight lesser opponents, but every time he fought, it was a big event because it was George Foreman on there. So he was able to kind of do that, work his way through. You could see him getting into better shape as he had each fight. You could see him figuring out what he was capable of doing at that age and how he could do it. And those fights, and I announced several of those fights on ESPN, led him to do some middle level pay-per-views where he fought the likes of Dwight Muhammad Qawi, a cruiserweight champion who had moved up to heavyweight, some other decent fighters. And that put him on the doorstep of the championship match, the first one that he would have with Holyfield. And what we saw from the second George Foreman and what made him work as a fighter, the old George Foreman was a power puncher who was going to knock you out with every punch, didn't really use his jab very much, and didn't have setback with the patience to set things up. This George Foreman, much more mature in his approach, had a tremendous jab that was enough to knock people out and was patient enough and still had the George Foreman chin, which for the most part was amazing. I mean, even Ali stopped him. That was more for fatigue. No other big punchers like Ron Lyle in that great fight, they couldn't knock him out. So he had that still at that age. And so he reinvented himself a little bit as a fighter. And then when he had the Holyfield fight, even though he lost that fight, he fought so well that he was able to continue and eventually got the shot at Michael Moore. And even though he was losing every round of that fight, ended up winning a world championship at what, 41 or 42. It was, one of the more remarkable things ever.
It just was amazing as we're talking with Al Bernstein, the Hall of Fame boxing announcer, and remembering the great George Foreman, who we lost at age 73 back on Friday. I was sharing, even when the time that I met him, he still, at this point, this is probably 2004, so roughly 20 years ago. He's a guy that had gotten, at that point, I believe, was out of the ring and was now fully into the books and being a pitchman. But it seemed to me that he really, and you can speak more to this, he was using his time in the ring, obviously for financial gain, but also as a crusade to try to get a message out. What do you feel he was trying to do with that? And what was that?
To show that you can have a second or third chapter in your life and don't give up on what you want to do. And I think that was a part of what was at play there. Of course, as you said, he wanted to recreate his brand also. And that was around the time when the people came to him with the grill idea,
Right.
which changed everything. And he was creating a cult for his personality in any case at that point. But part of it was to show that you could come back, you could do what you want to do, and don't sell yourself short. And he liked that. I mean, he got a kick out of the idea that he. I mean, he would say often that, he loved the idea that there's probably some guy out there who's a 41-year-old who didn't do something he wanted to do in life, didn't have to be a physical thing. And they said, shoot, George is doing it. I'm going to try, and maybe it'll work for him, and it was a part of his motivation.
Tell people who don't know about the George Foreman Grill. They came to him, put his name on it, and it's funny.
Yeah.
We have a generation of younger people who know him as the George Foreman Grill guy, not the guy who was a great fighter in the 70s, going that far back.
Yeah, it's just so many people like that in our culture, right? Where
Yeah,
people know
yeah.
them. It's like the old joke, you're dating a girl too young when she said, was Paul McCartney in a band before Wings? Right. So not everybody knows what preceded everything.
Right, right.
So yeah, I think he ended up I mean, that was a fortuitous thing for him, obviously, and then he sold, his portion of it for a huge amount of money. And they hit on it. The people that came to him found the right guy for it. And that was a part of the rebirth of George. He made it work with the boxing, though, because the boxing was credible enough by winning a championship and by fighting in all these major fights that it kind of gave extra validity to his rebirth. And also he was doing commentary on HBO. It's another important factor. For a number of years, he did boxing commentary on HBO, and so he was visible on these major fights, and he was there putting his imprint on that as well.
I'm going to date myself here. When he first began doing this, the other athlete I compared to was Joe DiMaggio and Mr. Coffee. That there was a generation of people who just
Yeah,
saw him as the
right.
coffee guy, not this baseball legend. But
Yes,
to your point, the difference is that George at that time was still very active. And so that made him
right.
pitch different than maybe DiMaggio with coffee.
Yeah, but that's the perfect analogy because they knew him of that, and of course his exploits, as you say, had preceded it a while before it, and that he wasn't still active. In his case, both those things were true. He was from before, but he was also had an active participant. But yeah, we often get that with people with personalities in our culture where we know them from one thing, and I mean, going even farther back, like Orson Welles, who was a great director and everything, but then in his later years, people thought of him as a pitchman for wine, right?
So it's funny how that you become this other thing later
Yeah.
on. You mentioned you and George were close. What had he been doing in recent years? Horse riding, and what are some of his other?
Just being, he still was devoutly religious and did the pastor work and just kind of settling in, and enjoying life. I mean, I think in recent years, it was mostly that, He would come out and be involved with things from time to time, but not that much, And I know a lot of people that wanted him to do a little bit, who sometimes, I mean, he was very helpful to his friends and would do things. But George was one of those guys, though, uh, he would help, but there were some things that he wasn't going to come out and about for. And it wasn't like he was a social butterfly out there at events, but he was content.
Yeah. Well, to the like we said earlier, he had such an amazing personality, an infectious personality. I mean,
Yeah.
I think one, he had the great smile, and obviously he was even in an older age was very imposing physically, and so that you had that there was a draw. But when you got into his circle, just the ambiance, the cheer, the wit was something that, and so it is too bad that maybe he. But at the same time, you're George Foreman. Sometimes you just want just to be alone, right? You know?
Yeah, that's the thing, right? I mean, in a way, we say, oh, we would have loved to have heard him more and heard from him more. But by the same token, he's one of those guys that wanted to live life on his own terms. He's a person that wasn't going to be, even during all of it, wasn't going to be maneuvered too much, right? And even if you would talk to some people that did some business with him, they might say, okay, we love George Foreman and George a cool guy, but he's not going to, they had a different view maybe of him. He was going to he was going to live life on his own terms and do the things he wanted to do and not be pushed or maneuvered into, which isn't to say that he didn't do favors for people and didn't go places because he knew it would help people. I mean, I mentioned he wrote the foreword for my book. I said to him, do you want me to rough it out for you or anything? He said, oh, no, just give me the points you want me to make. And he said, I'll rough it out and give it to my assistant here and we'll work it out. He's always was always somebody that would help people, but wasn't going to alter his life completely because of a business. Somebody's trying to maneuver him into thing. And that was the other thing. George is very conscious of people he worked with not trying to make him do certain things that he wasn't interested in doing.
What do you think? We've talked a lot about what he's done in both in and out of the ring as a boxer, as a pitchman, as a man of faith. As he leaves us now and we look back, what do you think his legacy was? What's the legacy that he leaves behind?
Well, it's a story, and obviously it's a story in several parts. And so when people have several chapters to their lives, each one of them gives you something to look back on. Obviously, as a boxer, one of the top heavyweights of all time. I'm not a big guy to rank people, but he's obviously one of the great heavyweights of all time. The fact that his boxing career was acted out in two chapters is staggering, and that puts him in another category. So many fighters try to come back and they're not successful, and the rare ones are. So that's one thing. And then his impact as a pop culture figure in America is a part that you factor into it. And so when you factor all of it together, what you get is an American original. And George Foreman at the 1968 Olympics with the little American flag going around the ring is an image that is never going to go away. And that's like that's the start of it, isn't it? That's when the world took note of George Foreman. And then from that point on, we have all the rest of it that went on over many, many years in a number of different forums. And you have to almost look at it in these different pieces. But when you put it all together, it's an American, he's kind of a unique American story.
Yeah, certainly a life well lived. So much great goodwill that was done over that time. You've piqued my interest, and I know the interest of many listeners. What is the book that he wrote the foreword for? What's the name of the
It's
book?
called 30 Years, 30 Undeniable Truths About Boxing, TV, and Sports. They can go on Amazon and get it. It's a fun story, telling a lot of stories about my experiences. And I'm getting ready to write a sequel, actually, called 45 Undeniable Truths, since I'm now 45 years into my broadcasting career and enjoying it still. I'm going to write a sequel. So we'll have a new one, hopefully, for people to look at.
We look forward to hearing about that one. I'm actually finishing my own memoirs here
Very
shortly. I'm
nice.
done. Same thing, just almost 4 decades, and some
Mhm.
Muhammad Ali is in there, and I happened just to accidentally watch the Orange Bowl with him one night, and I told the story.
Wow.
I didn't plan on it; it just happened. And but we had this in common that we get a chance to meet a lot of unique people. And I don't know about you, I take a piece of that, and when I hear somebody passes on, a little piece of me dies as well. And I didn't know George Foreman like I knew you, but I think of that laughter and those good moments and the impact he made on me. And so, the light gets a little bit dimmer when we have these moments.
Yeah, it's great when you even, different people, whether they're well known or not well known, when you get to share some experience with them that ends up being really enjoyable or really interesting, and then they pass on, you have this unique connection to them in some way, right? No matter what. And maybe they had that kind of connection with many people, but it doesn't matter because you still have that. And I had that recently when Gene Hackman passed away. I didn't know Gene real well,
Mhm.
but I was around him on a number of occasions back when he was coming to the boxing and friends with the Goosens and everything. And so even though I hadn't talked to him in over a decade, because of the period of time when he passed, it gave me a twinge, and you think about it, it sent me back to the times that were good with him, that were interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he's another one. We just had Brad Long, who played Buddy in the movie Hoosiers, was on our show a couple of weeks
Yeah.
ago talking about just the great moments.
Yeah, of all time. Basketball movies, and I can't wait for you to get back on Ion to do your basketball with the WNBA, of which
Yeah.
I am a huge fan and a huge fan of your show as well, as you well know. I love that studio show you do.
I appreciate that. You're very kind in that. And as we've talked, and there's a lot of work that goes in and to try to do our craft. And so to have somebody like you who likes the show, that means the world to me. And I appreciate that we had this time together, Al. Thanks again for sharing your memories of George. And let's chat soon if about the book or
Yeah.
even before then, whenever.
Take
Uh,
care.
Sounds great. Okay, the great Al Bernstein again, Hall of Fame boxing announcer, talking about George Foreman here, and just the many iterations of George Foreman. What a life lived. The age of 73, he goes on to glory, and we are grateful to have a part of him in our lifetimes as well. It's a Sports IQ with Larry Smith. We've got much more to come right here after a quick timeout. Stay with us.